Latin is the status quo. And the people who are discontent and causing trouble are the revolutionaries. But then after the revolutionaries succeed and they take power, anybody who doesn't like what the revolutionaries are doing is called a counter-revolutionary. All right, so you immediately get the seeds of the next upheaval when the new administration takes over. All right, so fear of counter-revolution. Religious divisions. What one thing, and we've heard about it today already, what one single thing did the most to undermine religious unity in France and to generate hostility towards the revolutionary government? What one thing, let's see here, someone besides my man Luke. What one thing in Catholic France greatly undermined the revolution? Someone already said it today. Well, it's a good thing the test isn't today. Man. Oh, Bryson, start typing. Yes, the civil constitution of the clergy. Good job, Bryson. Where they essentially they want to make the Catholic Church a division of the federal government of France, and they want to take all of the church's property and use that to back up their currency. Does anybody know what their ersatz de facto unofficial currency is? What was it called? A little bit difficult to say. Anybody whose name doesn't rhyme with Duke? Tell them, Luke.
Assignats.
Yes, assignats. All right. And remember we talked, and again, this has been a long time ago because fate has conspired against us. But this was the beginning of last week, right? And those were simply bonds, and I explained to you what a bond was, and they start trading as currency. And what happens to their value from 1791 until 1795? Caitlin Rodriguez.
They become less valuable.
To the point where they're worthless. Good. Yeah. So again, all this stuff's going to happen. We haven't done anything to address the central economic problems that caused the revolution in the first place. All right. All right. Political divisions, we're going to talk about that all day. But basically, the main political division is between people who want to keep the monarchy and people who want what? People want what type of government? Where you don't have any sort of monarch or single embodiment of the state. It's how Rome started out. They want what, Finch?
Democracy.
It's a specific type of democracy. You can have a democratic monarchy. They don't want a monarch. What do they want? Mitchell?
A republic?
A republic is correct. Yeah, they want a republic, okay? And that's the main fight. Do we stay with a monarchy or do we completely start over and become a republic? There's going to be war, okay? That's destabilizing. We're going to talk a lot about war today, all right? And again, like I said, they've done nothing to address the central problems that created the revolution in the first place. All right. So what we're going to see is, and we'll see this in the Russian Revolution, you see this happen a lot. You have essentially a moderate faction, which is the first deputies to the Estates General and then the National Assembly. And then you get a more radical group takes over, and then an even more radical group splits off from that group, and then an even more radical group splits off from that group, and eventually by 1793, the lunatics are in charge, okay? And the lunatics come out of a political club called the Jacobins, and they're over here. Let me see if I can really strain the system and bring up the pointer. All right, so here are the Jacobins, and they got that name because they started to meet in an old Jacobin or Jacobite meeting hall, okay, which is an old religious order that had shut down. And they're a debating society. They're a political club, all right? and it's mostly middle class. All right. It's, again, people that have time to go debate politics. They're middle class. All right. They're not working all day to avoid starving. All right. So it's a middle class debating society, and there's a vast network of clubs. Okay. We would have a Jacobin club on campus, right? If we still were a functioning school, which we will be again. Don't despair. It would be like a political club, like the Teenage Republicans or the Young Democrats club. All right. And so it would be a debating club on campus. All right. And, I don't know. I think Mitchell would probably be in charge of it. So keep these two things separate. A lot of times people lump this together. You have these Jacobins just talking politics, right? And then you have people who just already existed, and those are the sans-culottes, all right? And that's the working class of Paris, okay? And why are they called sans-culottes? Does anybody know? I think it says in the slide. Josh Appleby.
Because they don't wear a specific pants garment.
Yeah, good. They don't wear this, the blue guy. They don't wear the culotte or the knee breeches or the knickers, all right? They wear these. What do we commonly call these nowadays? What are these called? And we haven't really had to wear them much since the pandemic. Come on. Really? This is going to Luke. Okay, Luke, tell them what that man is wearing on his legs.
That looks like sweatpants or tights, something.
Okay, you're being too specific. Those are pants. Okay. Yes, Caitlin? Oh, hand
Nothing.
down.
I was gonna say pants.
You're right, Caitlin. These are the
Thank you.
pants people, okay? They're not the nobles. They're not the upper middle class. They have to wear pants. Why? Because they work for a living, right? If you wore stockings, they'd get runs in them and get filthy. So these are the pants people. These are what we would call petty bourgeoisie, or lower middle class people in France, right? They're not the peasants. They're not the lowest of the low, but they are not part of polite society. And so the people that own small shops, tradesmen, in other words, blacksmiths, shoemakers, that type of stuff, artisans, okay, goldsmiths, silversmiths, things like that. And you remember back when we talked about Brinton, the hostility between the classes, and especially the classes that are near each other. And the sans-culottes really don't like the upper middle class, right? And they are going to find allies with them against the upper middle class, which has taken power early on in the revolution. Now, eventually, Britain is going to start to look at the revolution and as a threat for reasons that will become obvious. And here we have how Britain wants people to see the sans-culottes, okay? And sans-culotte means no culottes, but here they're not wearing pants at all, okay? If you can see in this drawing. And so here they're basically, it's Walking Dead time, okay? They're eating the head of a noble, okay? The one sans-culotte lady is roasting a baby in the fireplace, all right? They want, and here's 3 sans-culotte children eating a bucket of guts, all right? They want people to see the sans-culotte as bloodthirsty monsters, all right? And we'll get to why in a little bit. It starts with the destabilizing events start with the storming of the Tuileries. Remember, that was the city palace that Louis and Marie and their kids were forced to go back to, and to leave Versailles and go to the Tuileries palace so that the revolutionaries could keep an eye on them, right? And then they were forced to go to the Tuileries, and then they were caught trying to escape to Austria. Then they're taken back and put under house arrest at the Tuileries, all right? And then we get the Brunswick Manifesto, which is an interesting document. It's just a letter, a threatening letter by the Duke of Brunswick, who says, look, if anything happens to the royal family, we're going to invade. We're going to take vengeance on anybody that hurts the royal family. Now, he's speaking for who? Himself, okay? This is simply a manifesto where one guy says, hey, and we get this all the time now on social media and stuff. One person says, me and my whole group are going to come get you, right? And so in response to that, people are saying, look, there, the king's a traitor. He's obviously a traitor. And the same mobs, right? The mobs that stormed the Bastille, the mobs that did the March on Versailles, the mobs from the Great Fear, the mob now invades the Tuileries Palace, and the royal family has to go flee, and they hide actually in the Legislative Assembly building, and they literally are relying for their lives on the legislature to protect them. And then we're going to get the September massacres, the next journée. Remember, did I say journée? A journée is a thing where the people of the streets move the revolution forward, right? And the very first bloodshed, I talked about this, when they stormed the Bastille and the new government didn't condemn the bloodshed, that sets the tone that anytime people are dissatisfied, they kill some people, they're going to get what they want. All right, so the September massacres, the government, the French government treats the Brunswick Manifesto as a declaration of war from Austria. And so they declare war on Austria, even though Austria hadn't declared war on them. And then Prussia joins with Austria. And initially, the French army is losing against the Prussians and the Austrians. And the enemy forces are getting closer and closer to Paris. And this is a time of rumors, okay? And rumors start circulating through the streets of Paris that there are a bunch of, what do we call them? Counter-revolutionaries in the prisons of Paris. And they're going to be released, and they're going to take Paris from within while the Prussians and the Austrians attack from without. All right. So what happens? They invade the prisons of Paris. And once you get into the prison, you can't tell who's a counter-revolutionary and who was arrested for public drunkenness. Right. And so they essentially slaughter everybody they find in the jails of Paris, including all of the non-jurying priests, right? The Catholic priests that refused to take the oath of loyalty to the revolutionary government, all the seminarians, all the priests in training, all the nuns, they execute all the clergy they find, and most of the common criminals. There aren't an organized network of counter-revolutionaries. That's just a rumor. But we get this massive amount of bloodshed in September 1792. To the point where the journalists call them bourgs de sang, or the drinkers of blood. And I'd put the number killed at more like 3,000. And people especially in the US and Britain and progressive parts of Western Europe, like the Netherlands and parts of Germany, who had really been hopeful about the revolution, they start to become critical of it. And they say, wow, look, this has gone too far. And people like Edmund Burke from Britain will say, look, this is what happens. If you let the common people have power, you're going to get bloodshed. This is why we need tradition, order, etc. Okay. So now this is our biggest, bloodiest journée yet. And then the National Convention meets. The reason they need a National Convention is because when the king comes back and the September massacres happen, they invalidate the Constitution of 1791. So they have no constitution. You need a convention to make a constitution. So the National Convention meets in Paris, and their goal is to draft a new constitution for, if the monarchy is abolished, that's their first formal act, they're going to create a constitution for a new French republic. And then retroactively, they don't do this at the time. Robespierre is going to go back and they say, look, we're creating, and this is really dangerous. You don't want to live in a time like this. They say, we're creating a whole new civilization. We're going to make something that's never before been seen on Earth. And so much so that we're going to start time over again. And so they call basically the abolition of the monarchy in 1792. They're going to say, that's year one. Everything else before doesn't matter. This is year one. Things start with this. And it's going to go on until finally, I think about year 13 or something, Napoleon says, this is stupid. And they go back to the regular way. Right? But this is now year one of this new French Republic, which is going to be a completely new civilization on Earth. Now, here is where the foreign powers are very justifiably against the French Revolution. They published the Decree of Fraternity, and that says to anybody throughout Europe, anybody who wants to overthrow your king and have a revolution like ours, we'll help you. Okay, they want to spread revolution and instability. We're going to see this again with communist Russia. They're going to create something called the Comintern, which is dedicated to starting communist revolutions throughout the world. All right, but the decree of fraternity is the same thing, that all oppressed people are brothers, and you can count on our help if you want to overthrow your monarchy. So now this guarantees that France is not only going to be at war with Prussia and Austria, but everybody except the United States. And then we get the cliche, Podger loves cliches, when France sneezes, all of Europe catches cold. But keep in mind, next semester, almost all the 19th century trouble that we're going to have starts in Paris. All right. So just a quick aside, the political spectrum. Now you're familiar with, and do we throw these terms around a lot lately, you know? Oh, so-and-so, you know, they're a liberal, or these extreme leftists, or those conservatives up in Valley Center. Conservatives, they're right-wing fanatics, okay? This all starts in the National Assembly building, the National Convention building, all right? If you go back to when there were still moderates in the government, the pro-monarchists, the pro-constitutional monarchists, the more conservative and moderates sat on the right side of the meeting hall. And the Republicans and the radical Republicans and the more radical Republicans sat on the left side. That's where this whole right-left thing comes from. It comes from the French Revolution. All right, so your parents might be interested to know that if they don't already. All right, and now this is always tricky. What, you know, and this moves around a lot. What do we now consider a centrist or a moderate? What is a liberal? Okay, what is a leftist? And it also depends who you ask, right? If you ask an Obama supporter, they'd say, well, he's a centrist. He's right there in the middle. If you ask someone who didn't like the Obama rule, you know, and voted Republican, they would say, oh no, Obama's a liberal, maybe even a leftist. Okay, so there's no clear-cut space on this continuum, and people perceive each other different ways. Okay, in the construct of the French Revolution, right? And again, they're going to take this metaphor now of the seats in the meeting hall. They start low, and then it's kind of like in the gym. They go up high so people in the back can see. All right. And in the National Assembly, we have over here, like I said, we have the royalists and the constitutional monarchists. And then we have, who are initially considered somewhat radical, these Girondins, right? And they're members of the Jacobin political club. But so are these radical group called the Montagnards, which is French for mountain people. And the Montagnards are called the mountain because they sit way up high in the meeting hall and they won't talk to anybody else. All right, and so they're called the mountain. And power is gradually going to move from the right wing through, it's going to blast almost entirely through moderation and settle in the leftist Montagnards, okay, as we go through this first unstable period. So we talked about this with the Tories versus the Whigs in Britain. Similar but not identical in France. The Montagnards, the radical Republicans, the Robespierres, they're powerful in the capital city in Paris, right? Their main political support, the people who would take to the streets and do journées for them, are the sans-culottes. They're willing to use violence to get what they want. And why are they willing to use violence? Because they feel what they want to achieve is so important that the future of humanity is at stake. And so if the future of all of the human race is at stake, some violence is called for, right? Robespierre's most famous quote, and you probably heard it, if you want to make an omelet, you have to do what? Does anybody know? Can anybody finish this quote for me? What's it necessary to do to make an omelet? Katerina.
Break a few eggs.
Yeah, good, Katerina. Yeah, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. And so for Robespierre and the Jacobins, the revolutionary state is the omelet, and they're more than willing to break eggs, right? They're only concerned, and we'll see this with the Bolsheviks in Moscow and the Russian Revolution too. They want control of Paris because they think once they control Paris, they can stand on their own and the rest of the country will eventually follow along. Right? And they also view once the revolution is complete, that it'll be a very strong central government in Paris that will control all of France. Their opposition, believes the opposite. All right. And so these are the more moderate members of the Jacobin Club, the Girondins. Right. Their power is more in the provinces outside of Paris, in the regions. Right. They don't like political violence. They don't want Paris to tell the whole country what to do. And they support a more centralized form of government, which is like, decentralized, sorry, like we have here called federalism, where for the most part, the people of Provence can decide how they want to do things, right? And Paris will only tell them what to do in truly national issues, right? Now, keep in mind, by this point, these are both Republicans. These are moderate Republicans and radical Republicans. Monarchy is kaput. It's off the table. There's still monarchists in the government, and there's still a lot of people that support the monarchy, but they're not at the table drafting a new constitution. Right? And so here is another British cartoon, and basically showing that process by which you're going to get groups splintering off from each other. You're going to get the Jacobins, and they'll splinter into the Girondins and the Mountain, and then the Mountain will take over, and the Girondins will be considered not revolutionary enough, so they become enemies. And then the Mountain is going to split within itself, and we're going to get more and more radical groups as people have to become more and more ideologically pure to maintain power. There's Louis XVI as a pig. Right, so the king is a traitor. And then there's another debate, all right? First debate, do we keep the monarchy or not? Well, we've decided we're getting rid of the monarchy. Okay, we got rid of the monarchy. Now we still have this person, this Louis XVI or Louis Capet. What are we going to do with him? And then the same split. Well, let's exile him. Let's let him go live somewhere else. Or no, we better kill him. And so he's on trial as a traitor. And this is the time you remember from the video where they find a trove of secret documents in the Tuileries Palace that expose the fact that he was conspiring with the Austrians against the revolution. And that sort of sealed his fate. And he was voted by a narrow margin, not as narrow as Charles the Second, but a narrow margin. He is voted, Charles I, to be executed. And so he is publicly executed by this new device called the guillotine. And there's his head being held out for the crowd. Right? So 387 to 334. So he didn't lose by one vote like Charles I did, but he is going to be executed. And now this is, there's no going back from execution. This is another step for the revolution in becoming more radical. All right. And then here is the death of citizen Louis Capet. They won't refer to him any longer by his royal title. Right. And here's his head, and they won't let his impure blood touch French soil. Of course, now we're left then with Marie Antoinette, who initially was the most hated of the royal family. And eventually, this is fast forwarding about a year, they're going to say, well, we don't know what to do with her. Let's just execute her too. And so she's taken to the guillotine in 1793. They both die very well, bravely. Louis says, I don't think I did anything wrong, but if my death will bring peace to France, so be it, type of stuff. So the Revolutionary Tribunal in Paris. So we have chaos in France. They're at war with the whole rest of Europe, essentially. And so we're going to get extreme times. Right? And so we need to worry about these counter-revolutionaries. We need to keep an eye on them. We need to keep an eye on our own people, because they believe that the biggest threats to the revolution come not from the Austrians or the British or the Prussians, but from inside. Just getting caught up here. Okay. And so the central government, again, it's still just a national convention. It's still this body that was called to make a constitution, but they never got to it. So they're ruling as the central government. And so they select representatives on a mission, all right, who are sent into the provinces and into the army to make sure people are loyal and to spy on you and listen to what you're saying. We have this, and they oversee conscription. So France is at war with the rest of the world, essentially, and they need a lot of troops. So they start drafting young men. At first, it was a volunteer army, but now they have to conscript or draft men to be in the army. And so these representatives come out from Paris, and they're there to make sure that nobody speaks ill of the revolution, and that when you are called up to the army, you go. And this is a very dangerous time because every single action is seen as political, okay? If you disagree with somebody about something or disagree with a government order, it's not because you disagree with it, it's because you're against the revolution. You yourself are a traitor. And so that's going to be very deadly. We also have, and this is where it looks better on your copy, sorry. We have the Watch Committee, all right? And that's once you are deemed a suspect, or if you're a foreigner, people are assigned to watch you. Okay, so we're getting now what all revolutions have sooner or later is a secret police. We'll see this in Soviet Russia, even to this day. They have a secret police to watch the people because that's where the main threat comes from. And then the national government essentially says, look, any emigres that return, any of you nobles that fled the revolution, if you step foot back on French soil, you'll be executed. So they put a death warrant out on anybody who didn't support the revolution that they can't get their hands on. And we're at war, we need money, so they go with the assignat as currency, and they print them and print them and print them, and that's what drives the value, the way you saw in that graph in that first lecture, down, 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 down to worthless. And then we get the Committee of Public Safety, which is going to become the de facto government of France from July 1793 to July 1794. Now, the Committee of Public Safety sounds pretty benign, right? It's like something like, you know, your moms would volunteer to be on, right? Like Tina would be on the Committee of Public Safety because we want to make sure that the roads are well lit, people obey the speed limit, right? There's crosswalks for the schools. That's not what the French Committee of Public Safety is, okay? It's not here to guarantee your safety. It's to guarantee the safety of the revolution. And who's it protecting the revolution from? You. Okay, so this is not for your safety at all. Right? And so essentially it's to protect the revolution and to support the war effort. So it's going to be given all power. And then it's going to have an arm called the Committee of General Security, right? Which is the official department now that's going to handle the secret police and the representatives on a mission. If you've ever heard the term commissar, that's the communist term for a political officer whose job is to go with the military and big industries and things and make sure nobody is being counter-revolutionary. So they all work for the Committee of General Security, which is overseen by the Committee of Public Safety. And so they have tribunals. A tribunal is a quickly set up court that runs fast. And they're going to arrest hundreds of thousands of people, and there's going to be between 16 and 50,000 executed. Now that number is just people formally charged within the tribunal courts and publicly executed by the guillotine. The number of people killed is way, way higher than that. Okay. And let's see here. Yeah, we'll get to that. So who is the head of this? Well, it's the incorruptible, right? The main character of the video, Maximilien Robespierre. And again, this isn't formatted great. Oh, it's just got his years, 1758 to 1794. Right? And so you learned a lot about him in the video, right? Upper middle class, political debater, a lawyer, and the most dangerous thing about him, absolute true believer, fanatical believer in the revolution. Okay, and so that's why they call him incorruptible. You can't bribe him. You can't pay him off. He was going to support the French Republic no matter what. His main ally, who again you saw in the video, is Danton, and they work well together because Danton is everything that Robespierre is not. Danton, as you saw in the video, he is good with people. He's got good social skills. He's a fantastic drinker and womanizer. He's very popular. And he's able to get the sans-culotte, the rough people of Paris, to support, you know, these sort of highbrow, stiff-necked Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety. So he, for a while, is Robespierre's right-hand man. All right? And then their publicist is the guy you saw, Jean-Paul Marat, right? And he publishes a newspaper. Does anybody remember what it was called from the video, in English or in French? Finch.
The Friend of the People.
Friend of the People. All right. Where's my pen? Good job, Finch. Yeah, L'Ami du Peuple. All right, the Friend of the People. And essentially, every headline in this paper is there is counter-revolution afoot, and we need more executions to make sure the revolution is safe. All right. And here's David. Hopefully we'll do some art next semester. And this is by a very famous painter, Jacques-Louis David. And this is the death of Marat. And they talk about this in the video. This composition, where does this come from? Who is he supposed to look like? This is an image that's been in a lot of paintings before. Ella.
I think it's called a Pieta or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's from a Pietà. And what does a Pietà show?
Like God slain on the cross or slain in general.
Okay. Yes. God in his human form as Jesus, coming down from the cross after he's been sacrificed. And that's how they want Marat to look. He becomes a Christ figure for the revolution. Remember, they get rid of formal revolution, so they need their own. And they want God figures like this. And so they show Marat here as Jesus. Okay. But essentially, he got stabbed by Charlotte Corday, who's a fascinating person, right? She lived out in the provinces, and she feels that Marat's newspaper is what's causing all the bloodshed. So she simply travels to Paris, and then there's some places like this in San Diego County, but if you go to big cities where people live in apartments, usually the first floor of all their buildings are shops, right? And so she finds out where Marat lives. It wasn't a secret. People could just come to him anytime. And there's an antique store on the first floor, and she goes to the antique store and buys an antique steak knife. And then she simply goes upstairs, tells him that she has a list of traitors to be published in the newspaper, and then she stabs him to death with the steak knife in a bathtub. And then she's arrested and will be executed. All right. Then we're going to get the first, and we won't see this again until the 20th century, but we're going to get the first total war effort. Right now, this country has been at war your entire life, right? But you don't know it because we're not fighting total wars. It doesn't especially require you to make a sacrifice. And if you want to serve, you'll volunteer. That's not how total war is. Total war requires the entire nation to cooperate. And so the Committee of Public Safety issues the levy en masse, which basically means everyone's drafted. Everyone's in the war effort. And so they increase the size of their army to 500,000 active troops, okay? But everyone's part of the war effort. So what are you supposed to do if you're a little kid or an old woman? You know, well, how does your helping out the war effort, what does that look like? What do you suppose you're being required to do? Since you're not fighting, what are you required to do? Gabe?
Work.
Yeah, you're supposed to work. What kinds of work? What kind of work would support the war effort?
Making war things like weapons.
Yeah, okay. If you working in a munitions factory, mining saltpeter to turn into gunpowder, right? The main thing, what do armies need? Food. All right. So the peasants are all drafted into the military, and their job is to grow food, not for themselves, but for the army. And so the whole nation now is considered one military unit, and they're forced to cooperate by Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety. All right. So the National Convention is going to start passing more laws, since now it has become the legislature of France, and they get the law of general maximum. And this is what they promised the sans-culottes. This is them keeping their promise, right? It's price controls. Remember, the poor people of the city, they can't grow their own food. And you saw how impactful the price of bread is on the people of Paris in particular. If bread prices go up, you have to do without other things. And so the government limits bread prices, right? And if you are charging more for bread, it doesn't mean that you simply need more money to survive. It means you're against the revolution. You're a counter-revolutionary. You're a traitor. So overcharging for bread or grain would lead to what punishment? Kylie.
Death.
Aye, death. Okay. If every action is political, everything that you're caught doing is treasonous. All right. You wouldn't be cheating on your homework just because you didn't have time to do it and wanted to get an A. You're cheating on your homework because you don't want to learn the revolutionary lessons I'm trying to teach you, and so you're a traitor. Okay. If you steal someone's lunch, if you do anything, it's a political crime. So we get that. And now with the price controls, right, strictly enforced. So to not go along with the price controls is to essentially meet death. Hoarding. If you have extra bread, like if you've saved up some bread for your family and they find that you kept extra bread, you're a traitor. All right. You need to give all your bread up to the public need, especially the army. All right? And the food essentially is considered property of the French military. And then we get the law of suspects. Now this is, we're going to have all kinds of people classified as traitors now by this other legislation. And so we need a way to deal with that. And so we get now the law of suspects. And the law of suspects says, okay, basically anybody can be arrested for not supporting the revolution. Okay, it's not enough like under Louis, okay, even under Peter the Great and things. If you didn't like what they're doing, just shut up. Just keep your mouth shut and you'll be fine. Now this takes a new turn that we're going to see more terrifyingly in the 20th century. Not only do you need to not criticize things, you need to actively support it. People need to hear you saying good things about the revolution. All right. Otherwise, you're a suspect. So anybody not actively on board, anyone who's not a team player, they could be a counter-revolutionary and they should be arrested. And so all of this sets up that crazy year from July 1793 to July 1794 that we call the Reign of Terror. Oh, and the little animated GIF doesn't work. But if you look at this in PowerPoint, there's a little king and his little head gets chopped off over and over and over. All right. But here's another famous Robespierre quote. Terror is nothing other than swift, severe, instant justice. And he says, let terror be the order of the day. All right. He says, look, we don't have time for debating. We don't have time to hear other people's opinions. We don't have time for people not to do what they're told. So we have to govern with terror if the revolution is to survive. And again, it's all worth it because we're creating now a new perfect society. And so we have to break some eggs. In Paris alone, we have official records of 2,600 people being executed during that year. Total number 20,000. Again, those are official. If you add unofficial executions and trials, it gets much higher. All right. And now we get the guillotine, which was quite an advancement. Back before the guillotine, and then times we've talked about, getting your head cut off for your execution was for the rich, the nobles. Only the special people got beheaded. Commoners like us, most of the time we'd just be hung. And it's not Old West style hanging with a gallows and they drop you and it snaps your neck. They just tie a rope around you and you slowly strangle to death. And getting your head cut off, or getting an instant painless death, was for the fancy people. So what's the revolution about? A brotherhood, equality. So we're going to cut everybody's head off. You're welcome. Okay. Everyone gets the same execution. And this machine, not invented, but publicized and promoted by Dr. Guillotine, becomes the way to carry out all of this terror. And so the guillotine, it's efficient. It's basically a harbinger of the Industrial Revolution because it doesn't require skill. Right? To be a headsman back in the day, to actually swing the axe that cuts off the head, you had to have skill to make it. It's very hard to chop through the spinal cord and all those tendons and everything in one clean blow. All right, it took 6 whacks for Anne Boleyn. Okay, but the guillotine, if it's properly maintained, gets it right first try every time, and it becomes the symbol of purifying France of counter-revolutionaries. And so here's a poem written to the guillotine by a revolutionary. "Oh, thou charming guillotine, you shorten kings and queens by about this much. By your influence divine, we have reconquered our rights. Come to the aid of the country and let your superb instrument become forever permanent to destroy the impious sect. Sharpen your razor for Pitt and his agents and fill your divine sack with the heads of tyrants." So William Pitt was Pitt the Younger, the Prime Minister of Britain, who was working against the French Revolution. And then we get, what do they start to call it? It was in the video. What is the guillotine called as it continues trimming away anti-revolutionaries? I hear a hand and I will find it. Nathan.
The National Razor.
Yeah, it's the National Razor. Okay, it's going to trim away anything that the government doesn't want. Big shock. Guess who most of the people who executed are? Commoners. Okay, so remember, this revolution was supposed to get rid of nobles, okay, and first estate, but the vast majority of people executed are middle class and below. Right? And essentially, many of the nobles have left, as have many of the priests. And we get a lot of people executed because of hearsay. This is a time, imagine if you don't like somebody, right? So let's say that Lena Bachman, she asked this boy to homecoming before I could, and I'm really mad about it. All I have to do is report her to the local representative on a mission and say, I heard her saying that she misses the king. Lena's gone. All right. And now I can take that boy to homecoming. All right. So, or it's more like if property disputes, things like that, people report each other for everything. All right. That's the way to get rid of people you don't like, is have the revolution kill them for you. So we get massive executions of just regular people with nothing really to do with politics. And then here's how the British see the guillotine. All right, it's got the revolutionary cap, and it's breathing fire and I'll say excreting blood, chasing the people of France. Okay, so again, this goes with the British depiction of, wow, this is monstrous what's happening in France right now. And they used it all the way up until they banned capital punishment in France in 1971. The last public execution in France was in the 1930s, but then it just became too much spectacle, and so they started doing them inside the prison. Now, what's going to happen is the French are actually going to start winning the war. France, by its lonesome, against Britain, Prussia, Austria, other German states, sometimes Sweden, okay, they're going to start winning and taking ground and expanding France. France isn't this big right now. They conquered all of this in 1793. And so the countryside, the Vendée, okay, they start to say, we're winning. Why can't we ease up? Okay, why don't you stop drafting our sons and taking all of our grain? And so they rebel against the revolution. And then we're going to get a massive suppression of these revolts in the countryside, right? Hundreds of thousands of people will be killed. They don't have enough guillotines, so they get these cheap flat-bottom boats and they tie the suspects to the boats, and then they take the boats out in the river and blow the bottoms out of them and drown thousands of people in the rivers. So why was there a revolt? They didn't want to be drafted anymore when the war had been moved away from their homes, right? They're still highly taxed. They resent the fact that their priests were forced to either convert or run away or were executed. And the church lands that the government sold to make money, generally in the countryside, the church land, it was shared with everybody. You could graze your animals there. You could use the church property for public things, kind of like we can do now, right? And so that property becomes private property and the peasants lose access to it. And who do you go after Well, if you're going to attack symbols of the revolution, you're going to find those representatives on a mission and you're going to string them up. And then National Guardsmen, okay, their job is to enforce the government's law within the country. And then finally, the jurying priests, the priests that did take the oath, will meet a bad end in many of the country towns. Political propaganda, this is British, okay? So here we have, here's Britain's version of Lady Liberty, sitting in repose, looking at the great British Navy, and the world is their oyster. And here's French's Lady Liberty, which is a deranged sans-culotte with her head on a pike, stepping over corpses, all right? And it says, which is best? You know, British freedom, religion, morality, loyalty, obedience to the laws, or French atheism, perjury, rebellion, treason, anarchy, murder, okay? They want to equate that total equality means total chaos. The British and the Americans, and even the more forward-thinking smaller states in Europe, are saying, look, you don't want the average person to have control. You don't want mob rule. You still want your social betters to run things because they know what's best for you. It's kind of like Voltaire would have said, right? And so here's French liberty versus British slavery. All right, so here's another sans-culotte just eating weeds by the fireplace. And then here's John Bull sitting down to a huge roast. All right, but the French extremists like Robespierre would say he's enslaved by the British system. Then we're going to go one step further in the war against the Catholic Church. So we had trying to make it into a state institution. That didn't go well. And now we're going to have people, and Robespierre wasn't really one of these people. But within this movement, we're going to have people say, look, we've got to get rid of Christianity altogether because we don't need a heaven. We don't need a God. We have this new France. This is heaven on earth. We need people to stop believing in these fairy tales. And so we're going to get an effort to de-Christianize France. All right. So the Catholic Church is linked with real or potential anti-revolutionary sentiment. And of course, to a certain extent, that's right. I mean, the Pope has, officially declared the revolution as a heresy and something to be put down because of how it's treating the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is already suspect. And they associate religion with the old way, with the nobles and the popes and the Crusades and all of that. And so they want to get rid of it. And an end to religion is very popular among the city people. Okay, religion's always been less popular in urban areas than it is in the countryside. And so the sans-culotte would like to get rid of it and have the church property in the cities become available and have their Sunday mornings freed up for doing other things. And so they say, look, we're making a nation based on reason, based on enlightenment principles. Once all the killing's over, that's what we're going to have. And it's got to be secular. Okay, it can't have any sort of official religious connotation. To this day, if you look at President Macron in France, he's really stuck because he has to defend the official secular nature of the French state, and so he is restricting religious garb and things like that, which is angering the many millions of Muslims in France. That's why they keep having these terror attacks. So if you're going to take out the church, whether you're a Christian or not, church stuff makes up a lot of the background of your life, okay? The calendar is based on the Christian story, right? All right, basically, the original calendar, Saturday was the Sabbath, and then that becomes adapted because that was a Passover, and then that becomes part of Easter, and so then the whole weekly calendar is basically arranged around the New Testament. All right. And so they're going to make a new Republican calendar. And the first thing they're going to do is get rid of Sundays. They don't want people having a Sunday where they feel obliged to go to church or think about God. And they're going to get rid of all religious holidays, and they're going to have to replace them. Now, the one thing that is a good idea that the French did at this time was they established a metric system. All right. We're going to get rid of all of these, a furlong and a dash and a skitter and all these different measurements, and we're going to make everything into standardized units in base 10. Great idea. Right? And it sticks around in every place except the United States and a couple other countries. Okay? And so the months, instead of being named after Roman and Norse gods and things, will be named after what's happening during that time. Right? And because of the metric system, the regular 7-day week is replaced by a 10-day week called a decade. You do get a day off, but it's not for any religious reason. But basically, the working people realize, wait, we used to get a day off every 6 days. Now we get a day off after 9 days. This doesn't feel good, right? So you've got a 10-day week, and then you're going to have a new calendar. And September 22nd, 1792 is, day 1, year 1. So they want to get all evidence of Christianity out of people's minds. And so then here is a large print of the calendar. But essentially, and look up your own birthday here, right? It's named for what's happening outside. They want it to be completely unreligious, even not even pagan religions like Roman and Greek gods. So, September, sort of back to school time, is vintage. That's when the grapes come in, right? So that's Vendemeer. And then the later fall, it gets foggy, so that's a Brumaire. And then we start to get our first frosts of the year around this time, right? So that's Frimaire. And then the frost turns to snow, Nivose. And then becomes the rainy season, Pluviois. And then windy, Ventos. And then the flowers start to bud, that's Germinal. And then they become full flowers, so April and May is Floreal. And then meadow, I guess the flowers go to seed and the meadows grow. And this is a hard one to say, prairial. And then what do we do in the summer? We harvest our crops. So that's Messidor. And then the best one, the one that makes the most sense, July and August is hot. So it's called Thermidor. All right. So, you have if you were born, in July or early August, my son would have been born on the 16th of hot. And then Fructidor, or the time of fruit harvesting. So those are your new months. And here's the new calendar. And you can see we got year 1. Okay, they make it near the end of year 2, beginning of year 3. They say 1792 was year 1. And then it goes all the way through until in 1805, Napoleon says that's stupid. And then year 14, he changes it back to the regular calendar. And they go back to the Gregorian system in 1806, which is the system that we still use. No public exposition or expression of religion. And then now it gets very complicated because we have the National Convention meeting in Paris. But then Paris, they kill their mayor and their city government, and Paris itself is ruled by a commune. And so the Paris Commune runs the city government, but the National Assembly is also in Paris. And so the Paris Commune kind of has power over the national government as well. Right? And so they want all religious and royal statues destroyed. It's illegal to dress in any kind of religious clothing. All right. And also they really want priests and nuns to get another job. Do something else with your lives. Thank goodness they don't destroy Notre Dame. But Robespierre does like this. They say this is not going to be the temple of Our Lady, but it's going to be the temple of reason. Okay, we're going to rededicate Notre Dame to the goddess of reason. You can get rid of your priest if 6 people denounced him. So there's Notre Dame as the temple of reason. All right. Come, holy liberty, inhabit this temple, become the goddess of the French people. Okay, so they're getting rid of religion, so they need a new religion. And what they try to establish, it gets kind of silly. All right. In fact, we get and you saw this in the video too, the Festival of the Supreme Being. Robespierre thinks they got to believe in something. So we're going to believe in this sort of non-specific supreme being. And from that supreme being, we get our ability to reason and to think. So it's very post-enlightenment. And so they have a festival of a supreme being, and it's essentially like a Macy's Day Parade. And then you have this giant float, this papier-mâché mountain outside of Paris. And down from the top comes the supreme being incarnate, which is played by who? Does anybody know who plays the role of the supreme being in the festival of the supreme being? Ella?
Robespierre.
Robespierre himself. dresses up as a supreme being and descends from the mountain with logic and reason for the common man. Well, people know this is stupid, all right? And also, a lot of religious people are just stubborn. They just won't stop being their religion. And so most of the population, especially the countryside, really feels the revolution has gone too far now. Robespierre, he didn't really support it. He was willing to allow Christianity as long as it wasn't in any way a threat to the revolution. All right. He wanted religious toleration. And so eventually he gets to a decree called the Liberty of Cults. All right. So essentially, he's going to say, you're free to belong to any kind of cult you want, and we're going to call Christianity a cult. So you can be a Christian. It's just one of the many cults that we allow to exist. All right. And so then we get to the radicals. All right. And then things are going to really spin up. The closer we get to the fever, remember Brinton talking about the fever breaking? Things are going to get really, really intense and sick before the fever breaks. And so we're going to get Jacques Hébert and the Hébertistes, really the first truly radical communist revolution. Remember we talked about the levelers and the diggers? The next step of that is the Hébertistes, who want they want execution of all religious officials, and they want complete land redistribution. And then Danton is going to start to agree with some of the people, say, look, we're winning. We've saved the revolution. Why don't we chill out now on this reign of terror thing? Right? And then Danton is denounced and executed by Robespierre. So Robespierre has started killing his own friends. All right? And then we pass the law of 22 Parole, right? Which is even more harsh than the law of suspects. All right? Essentially, if you are arrested, you're brought to court, and you have two options, either liberty or death. There is no trial. There's no trying to find out what happened because we don't have time. All right. So you are arrested. You are taken to a court. Your name is read for a judge. The judge says, go free or execute. And then you're executed. Now, this system of justice, well, not very fair, is extremely efficient. Okay. If you just instantly decide freedom or death for every person that comes before the court, you're going to be able to hear a lot of cases. And that's what Robespierre wants. He wants very efficient, deadly justice system. And really anyone, like with the law of suspects, could be considered guilty in some way. And so at minimum, 1,500 people are executed during Prairial. But we're still having but the French are still having victories on the battlefield. And in fact, the Austrians losing at things is going to be a huge driver for history for the next little while. And it looks like if they wanted to, the French army could go all the way to Belgium, right? Which, remember, that's what Louis wanted back in the wars of Louis XIV. And so eventually the fever is going to break, and we're going to get a reaction to Robespierre. Now, here's something. Robespierre really is the first truly totalitarian leader in world history. And in other words, he has the ability to enforce not only that you don't make trouble, but you have to positively say, yes, Robespierre is great, the revolution is great, or you'll be executed. Right? You have to be willing to work extremely hard. Right? That's why. Well, I won't get political, but if you want to be a dictator, you've really got to put in the grinding. Okay, and Robespierre was willing to. So if you want to become a totalitarian dictator, there are several things you have to do. One of the key things you're going to have to do is after you take power, you're going to have to kill all your friends. Okay, so when Kylie takes over, we've all got to go for a couple of reasons. Number one, people that were friends with hers, maybe they would like some sort of special treatment or some favors in the future. She doesn't want to grant those. But even more so, we remember when she was a 15-year-old girl, before she was the great leader, right? We didn't know the Kylie that's not part of the mythology. So we can't be around to contradict whatever story Kylie wants to make up about herself. So we've all got to go. All right. So first step is kill all your friends. The second step was Robespierre doesn't get. Okay, Robespierre does that. He kills the Hébertistes, he kills Danton, he kills all of his friends. But before you kill your friends, you got to make new friends first, right? And that's what Hitler and Stalin are going to perfect. They're going to put in a whole bunch of new friends to support them when they kill their old friends. Robespierre doesn't do that. And so July 26th, after the death of Danton, he says there's more traitors out there. More people need to meet the guillotine. All right? And so he alienates the members of his own committees, public safety and general security. And so now he doesn't have any new friends to help him out. He's kind of out there on his own. And all the other members of the Revolutionary Council realize that they could be next. If Danton can be killed, so can we. And they realize this is their last chance, and they all band together and they denounce Robespierre as a traitor, and they arrest him. And this is what the video started with. He's in agony. He's been shot in the mouth. And there was all kinds of stories about, had he tried to commit suicide and failed, or was it during the scuffle, or did the arresting people shoot him in the mouth so he couldn't speak in his own defense at his trial? All right. So, but the next day, he is tried and executed by the guillotine he has sent so many people to. And that's the breaking of the fever. All right. There's the arrest of Robespierre, and here he is, about to be shot in the face. And so people like Danton, Robespierre. So what are the long-term things? Well, this worship of rationality doesn't go away. The metric system sticks around. All right. We're going to finally answer those questions about if the rights of man and citizen include liberty, how can we have slavery? And so slavery is abolished in France and then throughout the colonies. Unfortunately, when we get to imperialism, you'll see it's replaced by something worse than slavery. And finally, we're going to get a few, and I haven't read your essays. No, they're not essays, but I haven't read your write-ups yet on what women got. But they will get temporarily legalized divorce, property rights. Napoleon's going to take all that away. And if you're really into this stuff, Simon Schama's book is incredible on the French Revolution, but it's over 1,000 pages. So I'm not going to go on to part 3 today. I'll do that as a video for those of you that are really into it, and I'll show you the extra credit.